Story 1. While living in a village in Burkina Faso, I was being stalked by what appeared to be a rabid dog as I walked alone to the market. The dog was getting closer and closer, and I was preparing to defend myself from an attack, thinking about all the painful shots I would need to get as soon as possible. Out of nowhere, a goat descended from a courtyard wall and headbutted the dog squarely in the side, and the dog ran away. I locked eyes with the goat, said my thanks, and he took off while I continued to the market. Story 2. After my mom died, her portable compact disc player would randomly turn on when I was in her room and play her favorite song. It happened at least 3 times the first year after she passed. It scared the hell out of 11 or 12-year-old me. I would shut it off and leave the room immediately. By the last time it happened, I jumped but recovered quickly and said, "Oh, hi Mom." It never happened again after that. Story 3. When I was 15 in 1996, I was riding my moped to my friend's house outside of town. I had just gotten it running well a couple of days before. In my haste to put it together, I forgot to secure one of the fuel lines. The fuel line fell off and gasoline spilled all over the engine. It burst into flames. I kicked it away from under me and stood there watching my moped burn. There were no cell phones back then, so I was stranded. This was out in the middle of nowhere. A wood-paneled caravan pulled up, and a very nice young woman got out. She comforted me and gave me a hug because I was distraught about my beloved moped burning by the side of the road. I thought I recognized the woman from somewhere. The fire department finally showed up and put out the fire. I asked her name. "Darcy," she said. I mentioned that I thought I recognized her. "Maybe I'm in a band," she replied. It turned out to be Darcy Retsky from the Smashing Pumpkins. She lived in town and was originally from 2 towns over. Story 4. I am apparently the only person who ever watched tattooed teenage alien fighters from Beverly Hills. It took me years to find out the name of the show and the Internet Movie Database page, and still no one, not even the people I watched it with, remembers it. Story 5. I was at a nice butcher shop in Los Angeles waiting for them to call my number. They had a case off to the side with bacon and a few dairy items in it. Standing right next to the bacon case was Kevin Bacon. Story 6. When I was a teenager, my friend was mad at another friend while bowling. He took the other friend's hat and placed it on the front of the bowling ball so it would be pushed down the lane, and the friend would have to walk up and retrieve it if it fell off. The ball went all the way to the end, past the pins with the hat still on. My friend was losing his mind, thinking his favorite hat was ruined, until the ball came back from the machine with the hat still on. We all dropped to the ground laughing. Story 7. This happened back in the 1980s to me, my cousin, and her husband. We used to go on weekend trips together, and we decided to go to the state fair in Albuquerque. We went to the Luby's cafeteria to eat and pulled into the parking lot. We saw a man in fatigues pacing outside. I said that guy is giving a bad vibe, like he is going to shoot the place up. I don't know why I said that, but we left to go somewhere else. Then the car radio glitched out, came back on, and a news report announced that an armed man dressed in fatigues had opened fire in Luby's with multiple deaths. Then the radio went off. It did not happen in Albuquerque, but it did happen in Killeen, Texas. I have no idea why I had this premonition, as I do not know anyone in Killeen, Texas, and have never been there. Story 8. Not long after watching one of the Final Destination movies with the logging truck, I was driving down a freeway. That movie made me very paranoid about being behind almost any kind of truck. I found myself behind a semi-truck without a trailer. My paranoia made me move 2 lanes over. Not even a minute later, a chain flew off the back of the truck. Miraculously, no one was hit by it. People do not believe me when I say the Final Destination movie saved my life. Story 9. I was sitting outside with my coffee early one morning when a hummingbird flew up and, just for a moment, landed on the rim of my mug. Story 10. I have a 3-year-old daughter. This happened a while ago. She can't remember, but I do. For context, my aunt gave us a bunch of old and used toys. One of them was a little interactive table that played songs when some buttons were pushed. Some buttons were missing. I was home alone with my 6-month-old daughter at the time, giving her a bottle in her room. Then, out of nowhere, the table started to sing. We both stared at it. At first, it played some songs I recognized, and I assumed a button was stuck. Then it started playing a new song on loop. It said, "Peekaboo, I see you," over and over again for about 5 minutes. I took out my phone to film it, and then it suddenly stopped. I put it back in my pocket, and the table played the Peekaboo song again, but slowed down, distorted, and louder. "Peekaboo, I see you." My daughter was visibly frightened and started to cry. I checked and tried pushing all the buttons. None were stuck. My husband laughed at me and checked as well, but we could not make it play the song again. Yes, the table ended up in the garbage that very night. We had the table for months before this happened. The house was previously owned by one elderly couple who were still alive and had just moved elsewhere. I still don't understand how it happened. I tried to brush it off as an old toy acting up, but it still creeps me out. Story 11. I think I felt it, sensed it, when my father died. His time of death is known, and I was not notified for a few hours. In the time between, I was in a panic. I could not place it. I had no idea what was wrong. My children were small, and I was home alone with them. I packed bags, loaded them into the car, and sat in the driveway wondering where to go or who to call when I was notified. He took his life that morning, right when the cloying dread crept over me. Story 12. I was once offered to star in an amateur adult film by a Wingstop manager and her husband, along with an employee of that location. I declined. I was dating the employee at the time. She was cute and I missed the free food. Story 13. I was in the Dominican Republic. I was not trying to go to Haiti, but my brother, baby daughter, and I were on a flooded road and took a wrong detour. Suddenly, a group of children with guns surrounded the car and demanded to know our business in Haiti. A 10-year-old had a gun in my face, finger on the trigger. I do not know what we said to get out of there, but I think it was the baby in the back seat that made them let us live. Story 14. My older brother is a total technology enthusiast and has reprogrammed almost every gadget in our house. One time, on a very hot day, he was working on some coding with another laptop open next to him, and I was sitting on the floor behind, watching as I always did. At one point, we started talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigation and secret agents watching us. There was a short pause in the conversation when, clear as day, a random voice on one of the laptops said, "Hi." We quickly ran downstairs and asked our parents if anyone had said hi outside the window. We then checked if some text-to-speech feature had been left on, but found nothing. We literally never found out what it was, other than some people who might listen in or something. I'm not the smart one. Honestly, it is kind of funny, and if secret agents are listening to us, at least they have a sense of humor. Story 15. When I was 15, my mother and I saw our black cat, who was about 1 year old, walk directly through the back door into the backyard. Through the door. We know what we saw, and no one ever believed us. I swear he was mystical. Rest in peace, Magic Bobby. I know you could teleport. Story 16. I once dreamt about a person I had never met, and then I met him. I wrote about him in my diary, including the nickname his family used in my dream. I wrote about how he told me he would see me later. About a week later, I met him. He looked exactly like in my dream, with the same name and the same obscure nickname. My mother and sisters did not believe me, and I do not think it matters much to anyone else whether it was true or not, but it was the most inexplicable thing that has ever happened to me. Story 17. When I was in kindergarten, my parents got me a black kitten. I named it after my babysitter, and I loved that animal. But before it could even become fully grown, it was hit by a car and killed. That was my first experience with death. A few years later, I was sitting in the house with my mom, reminiscing about the little black kitten, when we heard a noise in the garage. We went to check, and there was a fully grown black cat. It stayed with us from that day until its death many years later. To be fair, I think it was one of those neighborhood cats that everyone claims, but it spent most of its time with us. Decades later, I asked my mom if she had secretly arranged for the cat to be there as a surprise, and she said, "No, that was strange." Story 18. I would demand to visit people right before they died. I was born into a large family with many elderly relatives. At random, I would say we had to visit a certain uncle that day. I wasn't sad or scared, and I didn't say he was going to die, just that we had to go. Sometimes we went, sometimes we didn't, but he would die the next day. There is no logical explanation, such as being good at judging people's condition, because some I had seen recently and some I had not. This included cases ranging from incredibly ill and expected to die any minute to comfortably settled in a nursing home. There were no sudden deaths, but it was still unsettling. Story 19. I saw a floating rocking chair in a graveyard when I was younger, playing manhunt with my friends at night. I was 9 years old. There was so much self-doubt within me, but I know what I saw. Story 20. When I was a teenager, I was for some reason really scared to go downstairs to get a snack. I waited hours upon hours. Every time I stood at the top of the stairs, all the hairs on my arms would stand up and I got goosebumps. I even turned on the hall light. After many hours passed, I finally went down. When I reached the bottom of the steps, I heard a massive loud burst. I immediately yelled for my mother and went back up the stairs to discover the light fixture outside my bedroom had burst, along with the light bulb inside. To this day, it is still the most bizarre thing that has ever happened. I have no explanation for why or how it happened. Story 21. I was about 12 years old. I was doing some homework and, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a fly that flew around and then landed in the same spot, about 12 feet away from me on the other side of our living and dining room. It did this 5 or 6 times and I got annoyed, so I threw my pen at it. The end of the pen hit exactly the spot where the fly landed at the moment it landed. The fly was dead, and nobody believed how I did it. Story 22. Poker player here. I play tournaments, not cash games. In a tournament a few months ago, I got a straight flush. That's rare enough. Then later in the same tournament, I got a second straight flush. The odds of that are 1 in 5.2 billion. I don't have pictures, so I can't prove it. People I tell don't believe it. But I know it happened. Story 23. I saw a man materialize right in front of me. I was in bed just thinking about the day's events, eyes open, wide awake. He stood there for a moment as if he was pondering. I was not freaked out, but knew I would be if he turned to look at me. He didn't. Instead, he walked to my closet and disappeared. I was actually annoyed and spoke out loud to the room. I'm trying to sleep here. Then I lay there for a while longer thinking about that before going to sleep. Around that time in my life, a shadow bounced down the stairs and made my boxer dog very angry. It seemed like a ball and made thump noises but disappeared at the bottom. He was a sweetheart and a scaredy cat, so seeing him get mad was highly unusual. Story 24. I saw an unidentified flying object fly right over my house. It looked like a flying saucer with lights all around it. You might think it was just a helicopter, but it made no sound despite appearing close to the ground. Story 25. Saw a faucet turn on by itself with my very eyes, and I still can't explain it. I know I wasn't hallucinating or crazy because I had to physically turn the handle back fully off. The handle physically moved before my eyes. Story 26. When I was about 5, my uncle, probably in his 20s at the time, took me fishing. He brought his fishing gear, I brought my Barbie fishing rod, and we went to sit near a dam during a family reunion. My parents could watch my baby brothers and socialize without a chaotic kindergartner jumping into every conversation. The dam wasn't huge like the Hoover Dam, but it was set up so that on the side where the water was lower, brick and concrete walls kept the original hilly landscape from crumbling into the river. My uncle and I sat on one side and cast our lines. He caught and released a few fish, none bigger than his hand, and we happily talked about the importance of letting the fish go if we weren't planning to eat them. Then I got a bite, my first of the day. The fish was strong enough to pull me all the way to the edge. I had to brace my feet against the brick and concrete to avoid falling. My uncle scrambled over and grabbed me to keep me from being pulled over. My bright pink Barbie fishing pole bent under the strain. We were both freaking out because we were less than 30 feet from the dam, so what kind of big fish could be here? Suddenly, my line went slack, and we fell back onto our butts. When we reeled in, both the hook and the bait were gone. Then the fish leapt out of the water, its scales shimmering in the vague, overcast light, white on its belly and blue everywhere else, and very, very big. Thinking back, considering how much smaller the dam seemed to me then compared to now, if the fish had been under 10 feet long, I would have been shocked. Then it disappeared. The only people who saw it were my uncle, someone sitting on the other side of the river, and me, and nobody ever believed us. But we knew. Story 27. I moved into my grandfather's house for about a year when I returned to New York for work. I would regularly see my grandpa walking around the house. He died about 10 years before I moved in. It was never scary, and he never made a noise or disturbed anything in the house. I never saw him watching me, and he never communicated in any way. It seemed like I would see him more often when something new was done, such as after the water heater was fixed or repairs were made to the living room. My younger female cousin actually lived there for a few years before me. She asked about my living there and if I ever saw Grandpa walking around. She said she had to move out because it was becoming too much for her. Nobody believes us. Story 28. A mosquito kept me mostly awake for several hours. After it swirled by my ear and woke me up for the billionth time, I shot up in my bed, slammed my hand on the wall to my right, and the whirring stopped. I nailed that mosquito without even trying to look in its direction. Vividly remember thinking, half asleep, no one will believe this. Falling back down into my bed and falling asleep instantly. Story 29. When I was younger, I went on vacation with my family, and at night I could have sworn there was a Muppet-like creature wearing a helmet at the end of my bed. I hid under my covers, and when I looked up, it was still there. I think that was more than 10 years ago, and I still remember what it looks like to this day. Story 30. When I was very small, I had recurring nightmares about being taken from my family by a short, wizened creature wearing a short coat with a hood. Think of the creature at the end of the movie Don't Look Now, which I could not possibly have seen as I was very young, around 5 or 6. Years later, I was describing this dream to my mother, who suddenly stopped, mouth open, and gasped. It turns out she had dreamed of the same creature around that time, and she even asked it if it had come for me. It said, in a low voice, "You know why I am here." For both of us, it felt more than just a dream. Bonus part. I was at summer school when I was about 12, gazing out from the building across the soccer field, and I saw that same figure, child-sized but clearly not a child, now in a red plastic raincoat. This time I might have seen the Nicholas Reg movie. It was crossing the field and walking into a wooded area. I remember holding my breath and hoping it would not turn to look at me, sensing I would never escape it if it recognized me. Thankfully, it did not, and I have never seen anything like it since. Story 31. I once sneezed, scared a bird. It pooped mid-flight, and it missed me by an inch. I felt chosen or narrowly cursed. Story 32. On a ski lift a few years ago, I was looking over some intense terrain. There were moguls and bumps on the slope, basically a 70-degree angle down and through the trees. I would not even consider going down there. Halfway up, 2 snowboarders came ripping through the trees at full speed. They ran over a fallen tree and performed a full-speed jump, backflip, perfect landing, then shredded down the rest of the mountain very quickly. My brother and I just stared at each other in disbelief, convinced they were Olympic athletes or X Games competitors training at the facilities. It was pretty impressive. Story 33. When I was 9, my friend accidentally triggered the fire alarm at school because she was leaning against it and started crying. Whenever I tell this story, people either think I am the friend or that it was on purpose. Story 34. All the abuse from the parent was regular gaslighting of my existence, but the psychological trauma says otherwise. Story 35. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I used to watch the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show on Teletoon Retro. I remember one episode where, instead of Wild East Coyote chasing the Roadrunner, it was Bugs Bunny who was being chased by the Roadrunner. Bugs Bunny said he was running just as fast as the Roadrunner because he was taking pills that made him run really fast. Every time I ask someone if they remember this episode, they say they do not remember it at all. Story 36. I have a permanent shoulder injury from someone accidentally throwing a person off the second-floor balcony onto me at the Blues Kiss in Harbin, which is now closed after the security staff beat a young person unconscious and left them to die in the snow. It is interesting to explain this to doctors 20 years later in Switzerland. Story 37. It is a long, unbelievable story that I do not want to type out completely. When I was a 15-year-old girl, Viper the rapper direct messaged me his personal phone number on Twitter and tried to convince me to move to Houston to live with him. It sounds crazy, but he had a history of messaging underage girls, and I was one of them. I kept in contact with him for months. He would text me on holidays and randomly. He was a huge meme in my friend group long before this happened, so we stayed in contact because it was genuinely the funniest thing that ever happened to us. I tried to get him to send me money for a plane ticket so I could scam him, but it did not work. Mostly, we were just messing with him around 2014 to 2015. I have the receipts, proof, and his number on an old, broken phone in a drawer somewhere. Story 38. Walking into my old fraternity house in college almost 20 years ago in 2007, we lived in Daytona Beach and occasionally had issues with homeless individuals breaking into the house or entering through an unlocked door and passing out. This was a major possibility in the main common room on the first floor. Picture a wide-open room 40 feet deep and 20 feet wide with multiple couches. I lived on the second floor, and as I walked into the door around 10 p.m. to the unlit common room, I saw a shadow come out from the far right corner. It was on the other side of the room from the door, but as real as any human being I could reach out and touch. I audibly said, "Hey man, you can't be in here," before I turned the lights on, and to my surprise, there was no one else in the room with me. I had an odd feeling about it, an uneasiness that wouldn't fade. So I grabbed my stuff from upstairs and went to sleep at my girlfriend's house, which was already the plan. I woke up the next morning to a phone call that my best friend had passed away in a freak accident in Ohio the night before around 10 p.m. He had been struck by a train while crossing the tracks. The timing of the accident and the shadow were the same multiple states away, and I would have had no idea of his passing until the next morning. I still believe to this day that it was his one last check-in on the way out. Story 39. At 17, I saw a Bigfoot. It was not a bear or a deer. I'm a country girl. I know what bears with mange look like. I've seen chronic wasting disease in deer, which is spooky as hell. This was not an animal I had seen before. It looked like a gorilla but taller and slightly leaner. It was picking beans from row crops, stood up and looked right at me. I even checked to see if a gorilla had escaped from the two nearest zoos within 100 miles. Very weird. I'm convinced I might have heard one in the same area about 20 years later while in a deer blind one morning before sunrise. Even my big son was scared at the time. It was the only time he raised his gun that day. Story 40. I was having a sleepover with some friends for my birthday when I witnessed what appeared to be a lightning bolt strike horizontally through the house and hit the fireplace. Afterwards, there was a mark resembling an X hidden in the rocks of the fireplace. They were friends from a club, not my school, so when I told my school friends, no one believed me. I can't say I blame them. I can hardly believe it myself. These days, I wonder if it was some sort of delusion. We were all very frightened. I can't confirm it with the old friends either since we were around 11, and I have long forgotten their names. Story 41. I saw a dog with a white top and a black bottom. It looked like someone had taken a white dog and dipped it in ink. It was fascinating. Nobody believes me, but I know what I saw. Story 42. When I was a kid, we had one of those sprinklers with 3 twirling arms that shot a jet of water straight up in the center. One morning, I walked out of the house to go to the bus stop and saw about a dozen hummingbirds lined up, waiting to ride our sprinkler like a water park ride. One would fly into the center stream and shoot up into the air, while the rest waited their turn. I went and got my mom so there would be another witness. Story 43. I tore a ligament and needed a dye test in the nuclear medicine department. The needle with the dye was to go into my left foot. I lay there grimacing due to the probing the nurse was doing with the needle, trying to find a vein. I was ready to leave when I felt liquid on my foot that the nurse immediately wiped off. She said they needed a pediatric needle as my veins were very small. She left the room quickly and came back with a doctor. He found a vein quickly, and things moved on. I did have a torn ligament, by the way. 2 years later, after kayaking, I stepped into the water and stepped on a piece of glass. It hurt, but whatever. I stopped by urgent care on the way home to get a tetanus shot just in case. They insisted on an X-ray to make sure there was no glass left in my foot. After taking the X-ray, they came into my room in disbelief. They asked if I knew I had a needle in my foot. What? The X-ray showed almost a whole hypodermic needle broken nearly in half lying horizontally in the middle of my foot. I was immediately confused. How could that have happened? Weird. Then I put two and two together. That nurse in nuclear medicine broke a needle off in my foot and did not say a word. Everything started to make sense. Feeling the liquid on my foot, the nurse getting a doctor to do her job, the random pain I felt that day when I apparently broke the needle in half walking barefoot and missing a stair step. The hospital management said they would need to verify it was their needle. Supposedly, there is a lot number on them. The foot surgeon said the operation to remove it would cause more damage than leaving it in my foot. Okay. Again, no malpractice claim for me. Fast forward 10 years and I developed pain in my heel. I thought the needle was coming out. I went for an X-ray, and there was nothing there. The needle was gone. Both pieces were gone. Now they think I am delusional, but I am not. Where are those needle pieces? I am scared I will need an MRI someday and they will come flying out of whatever area they migrated to. Where are the pieces? Story 44. I saw a large train of bright green dots move across the sky in 2006 over southern Ontario at night. They were identical to SpaceX Starlink satellite trains but bright green and moving in a single file. Story 45. I saw a black panther in the woods behind my house about 10 years ago. I live in the southeastern United States. The largest cats we have had around here in 100 years are bobcats. But I know what I saw. Story 46. Once, I was on a walk to the countryside with paddy fields and marshes. It was dusk, and many ducks were returning home after ending their day to a large house on my path. As I waited for the ducks to cross, the owner of the house asked the first duck mockingly, "Early today? What happened?" The leading duck responded with a quack and turned around. All the ducks seemed to look at each other, and amidst a flurry of quacks, they headed back to the paddy marshes. Story 47. 8th grade. Had to attend a temporary middle school in a recently vacated Walmart after a tornado destroyed our school during spring break. Story 48. I recorded a high-quality punk rock demo tape with some friends in Chicago. A no-name band called The Devils where Prada recorded after us. The producer accidentally used our tape. Their first demo back in 2005 was recorded over our demo. It is okay, though. They were a much better band than us. Story 49. I successfully juggled only once, for about 3 minutes. It was very early in the morning, and I was on my way back to bed after getting a drink of water. I happened to glance at a bowl of fruit on the kitchen table and had a sudden urge to juggle them. So I grabbed 3 oranges and gave it a try. I am usually very clumsy, so it was a rather beautiful moment for me. Story 50. Pretty UK-centric one here, but I swear that I was on an episode of Blue Peter back in the day. Not even my own mother remembers it. It has become a bit of a running joke. Story 51. Took a nap with a bear. In the middle of the night, a female black bear managed to get one of my bear-proof containers off the rope, ate my granola, then plopped right next to my tent with her back against mine through the tent and took a nap. Story 52. I am 100% sure I was crossing the road once, and Kylie Jenner's car stopped to let me cross. I just know it was her. Story 53. I have a few experiences to share. The location for all these events is the country Bosnia and Herzegovina. Once, in my teenage years, when I was walking home alone at night, I saw a green light with a dark shade around it above my middle school. It shot straight up into the sky very fast. This was long before drones existed. I am not a conspiracy theorist, but I am convinced it was some sort of unidentified flying object. Another time, I saw a huge shadow of a man walking on a neighboring house. It was always the same size and rhythm, It lasted about 5 minutes. I was looking in the neighboring houses' windows, down the street, up the street, trying to find the source of light that could cast that shadow, but there was nothing. This experience will stay in my mind forever without any possible explanation besides ghosts. I have seen the Hat Man and Shadow People hundreds of times. I feel my house is haunted. It is old and creepy. It went through a lot during the war when we fled the country and abandoned it for almost a decade. One day, my sister started shouting and almost crying. I barely heard the noise through my headphones. When I did hear it, I rushed down from the second floor to the first floor, where the long corridor leads to the downstairs toilet. Seeing them scared, I asked what was happening. They told me someone was in the bathroom and had locked himself inside. Mind you, the three of us were the only ones in the house that day, and it was about noon, no creepy night stuff. I thought maybe the door was stuck, so I pushed it hard, but it did not open. I felt a weird feeling, so I decided to go outside the house to peek through the window to see what was happening in the strangely blocked bathroom. As I approached the window, a sudden feeling of fear, anxiety, and helplessness attacked me. I turned around and ran back to call my neighbor for help. He came with an axe and forced the door open. We found the bathroom normal and empty. The door was locked twice. Some old locks require rotating the key many times to engage a double lock. This strange event is my scariest, even though it happened in broad daylight. Story 54. I was at the local zoo and this man was feeding spree candy through the fence to a spider monkey. The monkey jumped down with his spree, hopped on the back of a capybara, and started riding it. Every time we go back to the zoo, I tell the story and no one believes me. All the animals are in the same enclosure, so it is clearly possible, yet no one believes me. I know what I saw. Story 55. I swore I saw a ghost in a rundown apartment I rented in my late 20s. Since then, I realize it was probably caused by sleep paralysis. Either way, it was one of the scariest moments of my life. Story 56. My first year at Burning Man, I volunteered at the greeter station. I did a really good job, and at the end of the festival, one of the heads of security pulled me aside and offered to cover my ticket for the next year. When I went the next year, the same person who covered my ticket, along with a few others, pulled me aside again and offered me a custom position as a liaison between the police, federal agents, and the Burning Man security team. I respectfully declined and did not return after that second year. Story 57. A dear friend of mine died a year after we graduated high school. I would visit her grave to talk, cry, and sing quietly. We loved musicals and she loved my singing voice. Singing together in the car was mandatory. It was always a good time. One especially rough day, I was at her grave. My life was falling apart around me, and I missed my friend. I was crying and playing the soundtrack from our favorite musical Moulin Rouge. When I was driving home from the cemetery, my phone battery was low. I went to plug it into my car charger. I did not touch anything on the screen or any buttons. Suddenly, the beginning of Come What May from the musical started playing on my phone. It lasted for the first few notes of the song, then stopped. I have Come What May tattooed on my wrist because of this. It is a constant reminder that she is always supporting me. Story 58. When my twin brother and I were about 7 years old, we were getting ready for bed, and our bedroom was covered in stuffed animals. Our mom came to put us to bed and scolded us for the messy room. She told us to clean it the next day because it was late. The next morning, we woke up to find the room spotless. All the stuffed animals were gone. We got out of bed, amazed. Our dad had once made us a cardboard house. We looked around in shock, and when I looked behind the cardboard house, all the stuffed animals were jammed there. Neither of us had done it. Our mom came into the bedroom and said, "Oh wow, you guys cleaned." Then she looked behind the house, scolded us, and punished us. We were very upset. I was extremely angry. Since neither of us had done it, I assumed it was my older brother, even though he never did anything mean to us. I stormed into his room and yelled at him, and he was very confused. To this day, my twin brother and I are still puzzled by this but assume we were sleepwalking. We have told our family about this several times recently, but no one believes us. Story 59. I had a short romance in my early 20s. I went out with my best friend's girlfriend and met her friends. It turns out I knew one of them. She was my neighbor when we were toddlers, and she moved to another nearby town. You can imagine the teenage drama that sparked. The childhood friends reunited after 20 years and started dating. Not even 2 weeks later, they somehow convinced her that I was so romantic that she should tattoo my name under her underwear. That's when I realized she was crazy and ran away. To this day, I still get teased about it. Most people believe it is not true until they have seen the photos for themselves. Story 60. Edit. Airport security. Departure. I left my hand luggage case by the conveyor belt in security. We walked through some shops and went to breakfast before I realized. We dashed back and asked someone if they had seen it. No one knew what I was talking about, so I walked back to the conveyor belt, and there was my bag. It had been sitting there for a good hour and not one person noticed or cared. Story 61. I used to sell solar. I would walk around knocking on doors all day. It was hot, so I decided to quit. I got in my car, picked up my friends, and drove back to where we were staying. Then, I saw a man completely naked, watering his grass in the front driveway of a residential neighborhood. He did not care about being seen. Story 62. I went completely over the bar on the swings one time. I was about 8 years old. My sister, another friend, and I were playing on the swings when an older man came up and offered to push me. At first, I thought the swing had twisted and bounced until they all asked if I was okay. I looked and saw the chain was wrapped around the bar. Sadly, I did not become inside-out boy or inside-out girl in my case. Story 63. My dad was diagnosed with leptomeningeal disease, a complication of melanoma that spreads cancer cells to the cerebrospinal fluid. It is incurable. On August 6th of last year, we were told that he had months to live. He declined and bounced back since then, so much so that we all urged him to get a brain positron emission tomography scan to confirm the prognosis. On June 13th of this year, the doctor was all smiles and said she could not explain it, but there was no sign of the cancer anymore. I barely believe it myself, and I am convinced he might have been misdiagnosed in the beginning because leptomeningeal disease is a death sentence. Story 64. I remember that in a 64-count Crayola box of crayons, the kind with the sharpener in the back, there was a color called Dookie Brown. No one else has ever remembered this or believed me, but I know it was real. For clarity, this was when I was a kid in the 1980s. Yes, I have looked through the official online lists of Crayola boxes and the colors they included, and none of them show Dookie Brown, but I can still see the label. Story 65. I killed a molester when I was a child, took his money, and ran away, only to discover a year later that he was still alive. Story 66. I was golfing and I am terrible. I hit a ball perpendicular to where it needed to go. It hit a dead tree and landed for an easy putt. It was a par 5, so I made a double eagle. Story 67. Not my story, yet I was part of it. My friend, my mother, her friend, and I went exploring at a recent draining of a lake. While walking along the dry lake bed toward the old boat dock and building, they swore they saw a bobcat or mountain lion run past us. They insist it happened, but we do not believe it. We were right there looking around and did not see anything. Story 68. When I was younger, just out of high school, I went to a desert party. I was sitting in my friend's car, a black Camaro with limo-tinted windows, player wire wheels, and the loudest sound system you can imagine. All the music was coming from that car. I was in the driver's seat. 3 police cars pulled up right behind us. People started handing me their drinks, and I threw them all under the car. The police began walking up and rounding people up. I stood up from the driver's seat and walked into the desert. Nobody saw me, not my friends, not the police. I walked about 100 yards away and sat down next to a sagebrush. A mule deer came up and stood next to me. That mule deer had crashed the party earlier, then wandered off. I sat there and watched as everyone either got arrested or ticketed. The few sober people were allowed to drive off, including my car. My friend Jimmy had my keys since I had been drinking, and he was our group's designated driver. There were 2 paths to leave the area: a right-hand turn and a left-hand turn. I was down the left-hand path, but everyone else turned right, except for the very last vehicle. That was my friend Waylon's truck. I ran to catch up to him and knocked on the window as he was driving. It was a rough dirt road, so he wasn't going very fast. He looked at me stunned, then stopped, let me in, and took me to a local restaurant where everyone had agreed to meet, including my friend who had my car. Also, I am 6 feet 5 inches tall, and at the time weighed around 265 pounds. Not exactly inconspicuous or sneaky in any way. Story 69. I don't know how or why this happened, or if it really did happen, but here goes. I was talking to my boyfriend over the phone late at night, and I was really tired from work. He was on his way to his mother's house to sleep over. He arrived and knocked on the door, but nobody opened it. I told him to call his mother. I dozed off a bit while he was waiting at the door. A jolt woke me up, and he said nobody was opening the door. I said his brother Charles was on his way, wearing an orange shirt. Just as I said it, Charles opened the door for him. He said he needed to hang up, so we did. After 10 minutes, he called me and asked, "How did you know?" I said I saw Charles running to the door. I described the color of the door and what it looked like. It's not a usual door, a bit artsy. I have never been to his mother's house before. It's a bit far. My boyfriend is now my husband. Until now, we still remember that day and feel weirded out. We cannot tell the story to anyone because it might be creepy for some, but we swear it happened. Story 70. When I was a teenager, I had a recurring dream about a cabin. I can still picture it clearly. There is a loft with a wooden ladder. On the main level, it is a studio with a couch and television, a dining table with a small kitchen, and a piece of driftwood hanging from the ceiling. Years after these dreams ended, I found myself in an abusive relationship. One weekend, he asked me to go to his friend's cabin with them. It was the cabin from my dreams years before. Exactly the same. It was the cabin. Story 71. In the late 1980s, around 1988 or 1989, I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in the middle of a half-awake, half-asleep lucid dream about robots using humans as batteries while we sleep. Basically, I dreamed up the concept of the Matrix. Story 72. 6 years ago, driving home after spending the day with my then-girlfriend. It was 3 a.m. The route home was a 32-mile straight drive down one road. About 15 to 20 minutes of highway hypnosis and being half awake while driving didn't help. As I was driving, I noticed something odd, so I slowed down to a stop. It was 3:30 a.m., and there was no traffic. I saw a large buck deer and next to it a tall, very pale white creature. It looked toward me with an almost humanoid face, then looked at the deer and started flailing its arms. I panicked and sped away. About 5 miles down the road, it occurred to me that no one would believe this unless I had a picture. I had to go back. I slowly drove back and found the buck deer dead on the side of the road. Its sides were torn open and there were deep gashes on its throat. The creature was nowhere to be found. I made a U-turn and went straight home. Story 73. I have so many stories. Over the years, I have found that the key to a really fun story is telling the truth in a way that is ultimately quite amusing. I can talk about the day the brakes failed on a three-wheeler in the mud, and I ended up going face-first through a barbed wire fence, bending a metal fence post entirely over because it hit my leg so hard. I walked home covered in cuts and scratches and worse. The punchline that makes it relatable is my last couple of sentences, which describe me showing up at the back door of my home, knocking for help. My mother saw me covered in blood. She screamed and ran to the bathroom, then came back with a big pile of towels. I saw the towels in her hand and the immaculately clean floor inside our house. I knew she always made us remove our shoes to keep it clean, so I gently stopped and calmed her by reminding her, "No, Mother, those are the good towels. I don't want to ruin them with my bloodstains." She went back and got cheap disposable towels, but I still laugh about reminding her that she would be mad at me tomorrow if I bled all over her nice carpet and towels. My family is somewhat famous for having a lot of stories about ridiculous mishaps and injuries in real life. Most of them have one or two good ones that they recount without fail every holiday. I have learned that everything in life is pretty funny and understandable if you look at it all and do not focus only on the single moment you, for whatever reason, think was the coolest, funniest, or most dangerous thing you did? Dude, hold my beer is not just a meme. It's a lifestyle choice. The Speedo-wearing shotgun guy you can find clips of online was a good friend of my real-life cousin. They were camping close to my house and got very drunk. In this video, you see a tall blonde guy holding a shotgun, so drunk that he can barely stand, while nearby people shout at him to put the gun down or freeze in a panic. He does not put the gun down. He manages to pull the trigger while half holding it next to his hip, and the recoil from the shotgun knocks him backward down a riverbank. He was okay and everyone else was safe, but to this day he aggressively denies that it was him or that he was drunk in that video. Story 74. I am not spiritual and did not really go to church as a child. One night, I heard my mother scream in her sleep. She has never done that since. I walked into her room and saw a demon standing by her bed. There was a light coming from its feet, and it was shivering. Story 75. At my confirmation party, my dad's aunt and uncle brought over a light wooden card table. These people were working class and unrefined. The table started moving from side to side while we had our hands on it. I was a bright kid, and there is no way it was faked. It was a big deal and nobody remembers it. It is very strange. I am 65 now. Story 76. I opened a can of soda. I am not sure which brand, but considering what my family likes to drink, it was probably a Pepsi Zero or Diet Dr. Pepper. I did not want it to explode because I had to fish it out of a box, so I opened the soda tab slowly. It lightly fizzed inside the can but was otherwise fine. The can was open for about 15 seconds when suddenly it fizzed over. It had just been sitting on the counter, untouched, during those 15 seconds. I was by myself. I have no idea how that happened, and it genuinely felt like magic at the time. Story 77. Police today asked me to leave because I was physically ill. I was assaulted and could not press charges. A police officer was abusive. I have a video, but I am afraid to share it because it may be illegal. Story 78. I was watching Nickelodeon when I was little, and they were playing a Zoe 101 special. In the middle of it, after a commercial break, Nickelodeon must have made some sort of mistake because it started playing the beginning of another show, Unfabulous, I think it was. This episode played for a whole minute, leaving me very confused. After a minute, someone at Nickelodeon realized the mistake because it abruptly cut back to the special. To this day, I have never seen another television channel make that kind of mistake. Story 79. When my husband and I were newly married, a person approached us about making couples pornography. He tried very hard to persuade us, saying, "We have the right look, the work would be fun, the pay would buy us a new car." We jokingly considered it. I could wear a wig or get a tan. He could grow a beard and shave it off afterward, dye his hair, and then cut it off. It is strange to think we would probably be living very different lives if we had started down that road. Story 80. I once woke up seconds before a car crashed into the front of our house. There was no noise before and no reason to be awake. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.